Brothers and sisters and friends, it's wonderful to be with you today. I am excited to share some thoughts and feelings about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and particularly with relationship to questions that have arisen in recent times about the church and why the church has so much money, so many assets in savings and investments. And there are some things that strike me that are pertinent to this conversation. I realize that there are legal proceedings going on at the moment, and I won't be commenting on those matters. I'm not a representative of the church. I don't speak for the church, but I am a member of the church, and I have a great interest in the history of the church and the doctrine of the church and the operations of the church. And full disclosure, I am a believing, practicing member of the church. I pay my tithes and offerings. And so I come to this conversation with a position of faith in the restored gospel, that it is the divine organization that we have in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that it is led by our Lord Jesus Christ through prophets, seers, and revelators. I want to share with you today some thoughts I have and about this topic, and I'm going to start with this essential question: why does the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints need more than $100 billion? Now, the reason I've used that figure is because some have suggested that the church has $100 billion in savings or investments. The actual number is unknown to me. The church doesn't release figures on how much it has at any one time. And so the figure could be less than that. It could be more than that. We know that the church has substantial holdings, and we know that that is for a very good reason. It's my faith and testimony that it is for a very good reason. I'm perfectly well aware that this is a challenging topic for some to consider, and that it's a difficult topic for some to consider. I'm aware that there will be those who are very happy to contribute to the church and are not too worried about how the church operates its finances, that is the business of the church. I'm aware also that there will be critics, both from outside and perhaps even inside the church, who might have strong views and think that the church shouldn't have such reserves, or should spend its money in other ways, or should find other ways of using its funds. And so I anticipate there will be many that will make comments of that nature on this video. And of course, I won't be able to answer every single question. And this is a broad interview video, I should say, which has some thoughts and feelings on it. And really, I suppose I'm interviewing myself, and I'm asking myself, why do I think the church is right to have these kinds of resources? And I'm going to answer those questions in a way that I think is faith promoting, but is also truthful and honest. By way of background, I have a background in financial and legal administration, and I've worked in those areas for 25 years in my career. And I've studied financial topics at university. And also in terms of the church, I've spent many years serving in the church, as both a ward and district clerk, as a stake auditor on several occasions, as an elders quorum president twice, on branch presidencies or bishoprics for 16 years, and as a stake high counselor for 5 years, and various other callings that I've had. So I've had a lot of experience in the church at both branch, ward, and district stake level. And I'm very familiar with the church finances at the local level and how they operate. Obviously, I have less familiarity at the global level, but I have an interest, and I think I have a reasonably good understanding of what the church seeks to do. And so I would encourage you to approach this topic with faith, with a listening ear, with an open heart, and to know that the Lord has a purpose and a plan, both spiritual and temporal. And his work is ultimately spiritual, but it covers spiritual and temporal interests. I remember many years ago, President Gordon B. Hinckley told the members of the church that there was a portent of stormy weather coming, and that we needed to give heed and set our houses, our temporal houses, in order, to look to the condition of our finances, to ensure that we were acting in an appropriate way in terms of families and individuals, by being prudential, by being wise in our expenditures, by being modest, by applying a budget, by living within our means. And these are the principles that the church has been teaching to its members. And these are the principles by which the church operates. So let me begin with some of the reasons I want to give for why the church needs money, and a substantial amount of money. And again, the actual assets of the church and the savings and the investments could be anything between 50 and 200 billion or more. I don't know. And it's, in my view, that is information that the church doesn't have to disclose. We don't anticipate that every organization needs to disclose every facet of their operations. We do anticipate that they will be open to audit, which of course the church is, and that the finances will be monitored and accounted for and expended in an appropriate way, which I believe the church does, and gives an accounting each year at General Conference as to the expenditure. Obviously, the church receives tithing money each year, and obviously it has expenditures each year, and obviously it has savings and investments and business interests. And for me, there's no incompatibility between that and its sacred mission. So the church has been given both the authority and the responsibility for the sacred fourfold mission of inviting all to come unto Christ. That's number one. Of helping to bring Christlike joy into the lives of people. That's number two. Of uniting families for all eternity. That's number three. And for caring for those in temporal need throughout the world. That's number four. So that's the fourfold mission of the church. You may have heard them termed with different descriptors in times past, but that's essentially the focus, is to share the gospel. It's to perfect the saints. It's to unite families eternally. And it's to help those who are in need, in temporal need, throughout the world. To perform and accomplish this monumental task requires vast resources, not just for the moment, but into the foreseeable future. So to my mind, my heart, my spirit, it's absolutely prudent for the church to have significant reserves and resources to conduct not simply its day-to-day operations, but also its long-term interests and projects. And remember that the church is divinely organized. It is, we believe, and I believe, it is formed by God himself. It is divinely inspired and divinely led. And its purpose is not simply to be just like another organization. It's not just a charity. It's not just a business. It's not just an organization that exists to make friends or do good humanitarian works, although those things are essential. It is a church given to us by revelation, by prophecy, by revelation, by divine mandate and commandment. And its purpose is salvation as well as meeting temporal needs. So when that's understood, when that's accepted, then I think our perspective shifts quite considerably, and we start to locate the resources of the church, both spiritual and temporal, into its proper context. And I think that really helps to understand why the church does what it does. So as to why retained funds to such a high degree will be needed in the order of 50 or 100 or 200 or 300 billion, it's evident that financial prudence in the light of an extensive going concern makes absolute financial sense. So any person who runs a business will know that it's not simply the operating costs of the moment that you need to be concerned about. It's not simply paying wages. and keeping the lights on, keeping product in circulation for you to dispose of, to sell or to rent. But you need to have a going concern. You need to have a projection into the future, to have a business plan, to have a strategy, to know that there will be ups and downs, that there will be seasonal difficulties, that there will be all sorts of potential ramifications that will occur, some foreseen, some unforeseen, such as floods and war and scarce resources and natural disasters and other challenges, societal challenges, supply and demand issues, fluctuating markets, all sorts of things that can affect your ability to manage your resources and to conduct your operations on an ongoing basis. So, to my mind, the church needs far more than $100 billion on a going concern basis for the future. It needs more than that. That money is welcome and is wonderful, but it's not going to be enough. So rather than saying the money should be dispersed or the church should do lots of things to use up that money, for now, I think it's prudent, it's sensible, and it's spiritually important for the church to have resources to sustain itself, not just for the moment, but into the future. Let me move on to this second slide. There are many who may not realize that the church has actually nearly been bankrupt several times in the past 200 years. And in the initial days of Joseph Smith, and for quite a considerable time after that, the church was actually in debt for a long period of time. We know that the prophet Lorenzo Snow got a revelation that tithing needed to be practiced by the church, and he instituted tithing, or reminded the people of the importance of tithing. And from that time, much was done to help the church to get out of debt. But there were still many other things that happened, which I won't go into, but they can be researched. Anyone who knows about how financial fortunes come and go will know that there's ups and downs, there's peaks and troughs, there's valleys and mountains, and so the church was in debt for a long period of time. However, in around the 1960s, much changed. The church took a real focus on saying, okay, we need to live within our means. We need to not spend more than we earn. We need to really get tight controls and a rein and a grip on this expenditure. N. Eldon Tanner of the first presidency had a huge impact in helping the church to get on a very good financial footing. So over the last 60 years or so, the church has really gone from rags to riches in many ways. And it's interesting that has also coincided with the greatest period of growth for the church worldwide. But with growth, yes, comes new members, comes more tithing, but also comes much more expenditure. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail. So the church has practiced very prudential practices so that it spends within its means, stays out of debt, saves for the future, and accounts systematically for its expenditures. And there's a really good source of information for what I'm saying in that article in the Deseret News. If you have a look at the link there, you will see it goes into quite a bit of detail about how the church hasn't always been well off. And it's really only in the last 60 years that the church has really got a firm hold on its finances. And the funds have always been under pressure because a lot of the assets we hold consume money rather than produce it. And our operations cost money. And we'll talk about that in some depth as to why the church has to spend so much money. And also the church, of course, saves for a rainy day. It saves for the future because it realizes that its mission is not just for the here and now, but it's into the future. To be aware of contingencies, be aware of difficulties, be aware of challenges and setbacks and obstacles that will inevitably come, which may not be able to be foreseen at this time. The church needs to have a lot of resources, and we'll specify a little bit more about that as we go along. And again, this is just a brief synopsis, really, of the work of the church. We could talk much more in depth about this, but I really just want to give you a flavor so that it's clear that there's an understanding that the mission of the church is both spiritual and temporal. Ultimately, it's a spiritual work to save souls. And that manifests itself in these four different ways that we've talked about. These are the four missions of the church. They are crucial. They are elemental. They're foundational to what the church exists to do. So lots of people, both inside and outside the church, might think, well, the church should be involved in various things that the church may not be involved in. And they might struggle to understand, well, why is that? Why is the church not involved? The answer comes down to a question of understanding the mission, understanding the vision, understanding the four key roles, the four key functions, the four key missions. And as we understand them, we have a much better appreciation for why the church has money, what it does with it. And it just makes a lot more sense to those who are critics, to those who are naysayers, to those who feel like the church shouldn't have so much money or is just a business or should be spending money on other things. I would reply by saying a proper foundational understanding of what the church exists to do, to accomplish, helps us to understand why the church has the resources that it has and what it does with the money and the other resources that it has, why it stewards them in a particular way, and why it doesn't get itself involved in other things that people might think are essential or critical or crucial or even preferential. People might think, well, why does the church build chapels and temples when there are so many homeless people? And again, it's important to understand the fourfold mission. And if we believe that the church is revelation based, then it will make sense to us. Even if we don't believe the church is revelation based, if we at least give cognizance to those members who do, that the church itself is defined by its revelatory mandate. If we understand that and can respect that and appreciate that, then we'll have a much better appreciation of why the church has so many resources and what it does with them. So the first mission is to invite all to come unto Christ through what we would call missionary work, or sharing the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Missionaries were first called by Joseph Smith in the early 1830s, later in the 1830s for most parts of the world, or even later on in the 1840s for a lot of places, and even later for some places in the world. But essentially from the 1830s, 1840s, there was missionary work done as instituted by the Lord through the prophet Joseph Smith. Today, we currently have 449 missions throughout the world. So we've got missions in every continent. And that missionary work is obviously extremely significant. Obviously, each missionary that's called contributes to the cost of their mission. However, the church contributes to the cost of missionary work in many ways outside of what those individual missionaries contribute. So I served as a full-time missionary in England many years ago. And again, I did work. I worked privately to get money for my mission, but also got help from my family. And I also had help from other people in the church who were able to sponsor me, to help me to serve. But even with all that contribution, that still wouldn't have been enough, because the church has many other costs in each mission that aren't factored in by the contributions of individual missionaries. So, for example, each mission has costs paid for by the church, such as the transportation costs that missionaries have to spend, including buying cars, maintaining those cars, petrol for those cars, servicing those cars, tax and insurance for those cars, which obviously costs a lot of money. There's property costs, as in mission homes, and obviously missionary accommodation, which again is subsidized by the church, medical costs for all the medical contingencies that missionaries may have, advertising costs to advertise the missionary work to the world, which can be substantial, legal costs that the church in its missions will have to navigate, like moving into new areas of the world, new countries. There's costs associated with all of that. And a lot of these costs are once off, but many of them are ongoing. They're perpetual in that sense. They're on an annual basis, and they're material. They're material amounts. So in financial accounting terms, they are significant costs. Now, of course, I don't know how much each mission of the church costs the church to operate, but clearly we're talking about significant amounts of money. So when we have nearly 450 missions throughout the world, that is a lot of money being spent Um, we're talking about supplying books, Book of Mormons, or Books of Mormon, I should say. We're talking about all the other things that go into um, building the missionary force and supporting the missionary force, in addition to the costs paid by individual missionaries themselves. Okay, so let's move on to the next mission of the church, which is to encourage Christ-like education and living. Or in other words, this is what we would normally call perfecting the saints. So helping members of the church and others to become more perfected, more knowledgeable, more compassionate, more holy, more obedient, all the things that the church does in terms of its education, its instruction, its training. It offers so much help to those who are members and others to become more Christ-like. So we need to consider we have over 31,000 wards and branches in the church, which means about 4,000 states and districts. That is a huge amount of church units. So it means that there is over 31,000 buildings that the church either owns directly or has to rent from landlords to conduct its weekly activities. Those church buildings are used every week of the year. Many of them, a lot of them, are used more than once. They might be used 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, depending on the area they're in. They could potentially be used 6 or 7 days a week, because you'll have missionaries using them, you'll have members using them, and leaders using them, and all sorts of situations that can be going on. And lots of activities are run from those buildings for the youth and young adults and other members and friends. So the church obviously has to buy land and build property, or it has to rent those buildings from landlords. It also has to pay for electricity, property taxes, maintenance, repairs, extensions, upkeep, etc., with respect to those buildings. So there's a lot of work involved, a lot of money involved. The facilities management arm of the church is a significant arm of the church. When you have 31,000 and counting buildings across the world, and that's just church buildings. We haven't talked about temples yet. That's chapels. Um, then that is a lot of expenditure. Anyone who's been involved in facilities management or financial management in their company will know that there are significant amounts of money being paid for rents and electricity and taxes and water charges and all sorts of things that are to be paid. And we normally don't see. Vast majority of members would have little or no idea about how much is spent. And even leaders at the local level, such as myself, wouldn't have a full understanding. We'd have some knowledge about our own area, but we wouldn't know all the details, even in our stake or in the country, or and definitely not in the area, and certainly not in the entire church. So we'd have some idea, but we know that the amounts were significant. Our own homes, we know we have a pretty good idea how much we're spending in our own homes as individuals each year on electricity and other energy costs and heating and all sorts of things like that, internet access. These things cost, not just for the hardware, but also for the software and maintenance and repairs and all the things that go associated with that, with plumbing and electrical works and everything, gardening. So there's significant amounts to be done. The church also runs several private universities, seminary and institute courses, and a global educational program at greatly subsidized costs to students. So the church has to employ teachers and professors and those who work on these educational programs in order for these to operate. And this is a significant undertaking. The number of students in seminary or institute or universities with the church is significant. We are talking about anything between 50 to 100,000 or more at any one time. I don't know the exact figures, but it's probably far in excess of that. In fact, if you take all the operations, and those facilities have to be paid for, their educational, their curriculum, their employees, and various other things, they all have to be paid for. So the church has a huge role to play in maintaining that work. And of course, it's not just the current properties that exist, it's also other properties that are being built, because as we know, the church is growing especially in many areas of the world, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and where the church continues to grow at a very rapid pace. So that requires assets, it requires resources, it requires careful management and forecasting to see what's available. And the church does not dedicate a building unless it's paid for. It has to be paid for. The church doesn't go into debt. And we have revelations on that. The Lord said many years ago in 1834, he said to the saints, "Verily I say unto you concerning your debts, behold, it is my will that you shall pay all your debts." That's section 104 of the Doctrine and Covenants, verse 77. The Lord wanted the saints to get rid of their debts, to pay them off. And now the Lord doesn't want his church to go into debt. So these buildings are paid for in full before they're dedicated. The church lives within its means. It doesn't borrow to finance its operations. So it has to have significant resources because it has a significant work to do. All we have to do is think about our own financial situation. And as individuals or as families, we know we have to live within a budget. And if we don't, we get into trouble. And we probably all know what it's like to be living beyond our means or to be going into debt. Sometimes that debt is warranted. It might be for education or for a home or for a means of transport, which is necessary at the time. But we all know what it's like to have to pay our way out of debt. And it can feel like a bondage and a burden and a crippling burden to us as individuals and as families. And most of us are overjoyed when we reduce our debt and then when we get rid of it altogether and we can put money aside for savings. So debt might be necessary in some ways, but it's also difficult to bear. And there are some debts which are not necessary and which just put a stranglehold around us. So the church lives within its means and doesn't go into debt for its operations. The third mission of the church is to unite families eternally. That can only be done in temples of the Lord, in houses of the Lord. Many wonder why the church builds temples. And again, that is something that can only be fully explained with reference to the purpose of the gospel. The gospel is to unite families eternally through eternal covenants, through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Redeemer. And it is only in the temple of the Lord, the house of the Lord, that these special covenants and ordinances can be entered into, that the sealing power of the priesthood is manifest in uniting families together for time and all eternity. So the temple work of the church is hugely significant. At present, we have 190 operating temples, 8 others being renovated, 53 under construction, and another 116 announced. So that's a total of 367 temples that are either operating, being renovated, under construction, or that have been announced. At this recent general conference, only a couple of weeks ago, our prophet, President Nelson, announced 17 new temples. 7 of those would be in the United States. I think another 5 or so in Central or South America, and then some in Africa and 2 in Europe. So altogether, 17 new temples, one of which will be in Ireland, which is where I live, and I'm so happy with that. I have a picture on the screen of a potential image, which I generated using artificial intelligence. Obviously, that's just an imaginary image, and the actual temple will look different to that, but it serves to illustrate the function of the church and the function of the temple. Nowhere else can these sacred ordinances and covenants be entered into, only in holy temples. They can't be done in our homes. Really, it can't be done at church. It's to be done in the temple. Historically, there were times when we didn't have temples, when these ordinances were performed in special occasions in places that were not dedicated temples. But generally, in our day and age, they have to be performed in the temple. You can see I've shown a map on the screen of places where the temples are or where they're being announced or under construction. North America, which is Canada and the USA, has 161 temples. Between Central and South America, they have 100 temples. Europe has 25. Africa has 28. Asia has 31. And Oceania has 21. So all throughout the globe, there are temples operating, being renovated, announced, or under construction. Most of the temples are in North, South, Central America. However, There are temples being built all over the world. Many of these temples, of course, have been built in expensive places traditionally. Places like North America and Europe have a huge amount of temples. And obviously the payment of the land and the building materials is very significant in those places. The building costs are cheaper in other places, such as South America, or Africa, or Asia, but the costs are still significant in those places because temples are built to a very high level of specification. The quality of the workmanship, the quality of the design, the quality of the surroundings, and the planning, everything is done with meticulous detail, and no expense is spared, because on the basis that the temple is the house of the Lord. You bring your best to the Lord. You bring your absolute best. So nothing is too good for the Lord. So I have no hesitation in saying I stand totally and fully behind the fact that the church builds temples. And I want to see more temples, not less. And I believe that those who go to the house of the Lord will find peace and happiness and meaning and a depth of spirituality which will infuse their souls if they go with a sense of openness, a sense of humility, a sense of appreciation, a sense of gratitude, and with a sense of spiritual maturity. They will go and experience great knowledge, great instruction, great joy, great education in things of the Lord. So in order to bring that holy work about, the church needs more temples, not less. And the building and operating costs of each temple is significant, even for those that are a bit smaller in size. A lot of the temples are very large in size to accommodate the work that needs to be done. And the operating costs are obviously phenomenal. But even for the smaller temples, the operating costs are substantial. And temples require ongoing maintenance, ongoing cleaning, ongoing repairs, ongoing refurbishment, and all the things that you would expect of a modern functioning building. They need to be built according to very high building regulations, very high standards. They need to have proper systems. They need to have lifts. They need to be secure according to fire regulations and health and safety regulations, access and entry points, lighting, all of the things that needs to go into them needs to be carefully considered. So no one should doubt that having at the moment nearly 200 operating temples, and when all these other ones are built, it will be closer to 400. No one should doubt that that is a significant undertaking and requires vast resources, and requires the church not simply to have resources each year based on tithing, but also requires the church to be prudent and wise and to invest and to save and to put forward money for a future day. And then finally, the fourth mission of the church is to care for those in need. And the picture I have there is of members of the church wearing the helping hands vests, which you may have seen. Some of them are white, some of them are yellow. These ones are yellow, wearing those helping hands tabards to show that they are serving in the community. And anyone who knows the work of the church will know that the church is heavily involved in humanitarian work across the world. So in 2023, this work of welfare, self-reliance, humanitarian aid, and volunteer service added up to more than 1.3 billion US dollars in expenditures and 6.2 million hours volunteered. Now that's substantial. And that is, as far as I can see, that's what we're spending each year. And the amount seems to be going up year on year. The church's 4,119 humanitarian projects bless people in 191 countries and territories. So to have 4,000 humanitarian projects throughout the year, I mean, that's significant. That's perhaps 400 projects, 400 to 500 projects going on in any one month. So you're talking about numerous projects simultaneously, every single day, projects going on throughout the world. And of course, that makes sense in a church that's running all the way from Alaska to Tasmania, from Bangkok over to Chile. I mean, everywhere across the world in between. nearly every country and nation and territory. So that's a phenomenal amount of time and money and resources and effort spent. The church is involved hugely in feeding the sick, healing, helping to heal the sick, helping to feed the hungry, helping to clothe the naked, helping to shelter people, in all sorts of ways that we don't have the time to go into. But those involved in the church and knowing something about what the church is involved in, it has a huge project and it's literally helping millions of people across the Europe every year. And so I can't speak too highly of this effort of the church to care for those in need. Again, some might say, well, the church should spend more on caring for those in need and less on its temple work. I would reply respectfully to that, that the church has a fourfold mission and it needs to look to the long-term implications of the salvation of its people. We believe not just in humanitarian causes. They are vital, they are crucial, they are critical. We believe in educating people, in helping people to help themselves, in helping people to work and to serve and to have temporal resources and to have food storage and to have money in the bank and have clothing and all the things we believe in. And we will help them to do that. But we also believe deeply in the salvation of their souls, in their eternal nature, in their eternal well-being, that we don't just live for this life, we live into the eternities, and we are helping to save souls for the eternities. And again, our temples are primary for that. And of course, our chapels as well, for the education and the work that we do day by day over each week to help people, to give people confidence, to give them knowledge, to give them leadership opportunities, to give them training opportunities, to give them a sense of administrative skill so they can build up their administrative capacity, their speaking abilities, their team working skills, all of the things that the church works on. And I know I've been the recipient and beneficiary of these great blessings over a long period of time. My experience in the church has been second to none in giving me opportunities to lead and to teach and to bless and to serve and to forget myself and go and help people, to visit people in their homes, to help the downtrodden, to help the weary, to help the lonely, to help the tearful and the afraid, and also to receive comfort, to receive nourishment, to receive support, to receive aid in my time of need. So it's a mutual reciprocity that the church is involved in. So there are many other things that we could say and we could talk about. To my mind, I willingly and gleefully and with gladness, pay my tithing and my offerings. And I know that the church is very conscientious about how that tithing is used, that it's used to bless the lives of the people, that it's used to conduct these operations that we're talking about, building temples, building chapels, keeping the lights on, doing missionary work, printing books of Mormon, and all the other great work that the church does, employing people to teach and to train and to upskill and to educate, to build faith, to build testimony, to teach hard work and self-reliance and prudence, to teach discipleship, to teach love, to teach mercy and compassion and knowledge, to teach braveness and wisdom and understanding, that the church is involved in a collaborative, holistic way in building humanity in temporal and spiritual ways, not just for the moment, but for the eternities, to feed us both with food and with knowledge, to inspire us, yes, with shelter and clothing, but also to inspire us with teachings and doctrine and truth and scripture and prophecies and miracles. So the church is a great and a marvelous and a wonderful institution. It spends significant resources, it collects significant resources, but it uses the widow's mite carefully, with stewardship, with prudence, with wisdom, with a great sense of the sacred, that these resources are sacred. And I know in my experience, having served as a branch president for 10 years, and as an elders quorum president twice and in other callings, I know from first-hand experience that the leaders of the church are very conscientious about the donations of members and use them for a sacred purpose. And then, of course, on the global level, the church has the authority and the power and the wisdom to carefully manage its resources and to invest them in a way that's appropriate. There are many scriptures given to us by the Savior, many parables, where he talked about um, the need for us to carefully steward our resources. In the parable of the talents, he gave 1, 2, and 5 to the 3 servants. And when he came back, the one with 5 had doubled his to 10. The one with 2 had doubled his to 4. The one with 1 had buried his in the ground. The Lord commended the first 2 for doubling their talents, but to the final one, he condemned him for saying he should have put his talent to the money changers, and he would have obtained interest so that the Lord could be given his own with interest when the time of reckoning came, when the time for accounting came. So that slothful servant was cast out, and his 1 talent was given to him who had 10, who would use it prudentially. So the Lord expects us to magnify our resources. He expects us to add to increase, to multiply what he gives us. Whatever he gives us, he expects us to grow it like a seed grows into a tree. He expects us to improve upon what we have. If he gives us 5, he expects us to double it to 10. I don't think that's unreasonable. I know with his help and his great strength, he can help us to do precisely that. It's my testimony that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the Lord's church and kingdom on the earth. It is a wondrous kingdom. It's a kingdom of destiny. It's not just like any other organization. It is a special organization with a special mission. The leaders are not haughty. They are not proud. And they're trying to be humble and prayerful, to use the resources the Lord has given to them, which are very sacred, to use them in a righteous way. And of course, like all organizations, the church has some individuals in it which may not be honest and prudent in all things. But in my experience, the church as an organization is an honest, prudent, respectful, truthful organization. And what it does with its money is something I believe in. I trust, I safeguard the resources of the church in my time in leadership. And I know that the church takes its resources very seriously and accounts for its resources with great detail and with great concern. And I know the church does a phenomenal work. Its work is outward looking. Some have suggested the leaders are just benefiting themselves. It really is so untrue. My experience of leadership in the church is that you have to give a lot of time, a lot of money that you give to the church, but you do it with love, you do it with joy. You want to do it because you love the church, you love the kingdom, you love the work that's involved. The work of the church is a holy, saving work. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. I commend the church and I encourage it to keep going forward. And I pray for it, that it will be blessed, that its resources will multiply and be magnified and be expanded, that members will donate to the church and feel the benefit and the blessing of giving their money to a sacred cause, of knowing that they are contributing to the Lord's kingdom. Even if my tithing is only a drop in the ocean of the church's funds, it is to be used for the salvation of man, for the upbuilding, for the strengthening of the kingdom of God, for to help and bless and save the souls of men, to bring souls to Christ, to bring souls to truth, to save souls. And the church wants to bless the entire world. Every single person that lives on the planet, the church can and will bless, if we allow it to, if we help the church. The church, of course, is not just some people. The church is all the people that belong to it. It's the organization, and that's divinely led, but it's also the people who belong to it. So the church is, in many ways, a community of people who believe, who serve, who have faith, who have testimony, who love to do what's right. And there are so many members who are so generous in their offerings, who give and give and give so that others might be blessed. I think it's wonderful. In this day and age where so much focus is on our own needs, our own desires, our own wishes, our own fulfillment, to have an organization that teaches us to forget ourselves and go to work, to serve others, to love others, to bless others, to give up our time and our money and our resources to help others. I don't have any hesitation in saying that that's a beautiful thing. It's a wondrous thing I've personally experienced, and I don't regret it for a second. I love to serve. I love to be able to give to the Lord because He has given me everything, and His church has blessed me phenomenally, not just for the moment, but throughout my entire life, and will continue to bless me into the future and into the eternities that lie ahead. I'd encourage you to study this subject in prayer, in faith. If you have any questions or any concerns, seek out good, reputable, faithful sources. The church and those who are supportive of the church provide the information you need to have to give you confidence that the Lord is in charge of His work, and He has delegated authority to His prophets and apostles and the presiding bishopric to manage the affairs and the resources of the church in a wise way. And they are doing that. I believe they are fundamentally doing that. There may always be individuals who act out of accordance with the commandments, but the Lord has His way of dealing with that. And the Lord has His way of compensating us for any losses we might experience. He has a way of turning lemons into lemonade, and the church will go forward. The kingdom will go forward. It will roll forward. Nothing can stop it. No power on earth or in hell can stop the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from going forward and fulfilling its divinely appointed mission. I believe that. I've experienced that. I know it to be true. I encourage you to seek out, if you have an interest in this topic, if you have any concerns or questions, seek it out. Learn, study, ask your Father in heaven in prayer. Learn from good, faithful, reliable sources, and you will know that the Lord is in charge of His work. He is guiding it. He is leading it. He is administering it through His servants. And He will perform great miracles in the future. Great work. There will be a need for these resources. We don't always know how or why, but the Lord knows, and He will prepare His people to be able to strengthen the weak, to lift up the weary, to bless those who are downhearted, to save those who are lost, to rescue the afflicted. He will do that work through His servants. Food to feed the hungry cannot come from empty shelves. Testimony to build up the struggling can't come from those who have no faith. Water to give a quenching to the thirst of others can't come from those who have no water. So we need resources. We need resources to bless the lives of the people. How grateful I am for the church that I belong to and the great work that it does. I bear my testimony that this work is true, that the work of the Lord will fill the whole earth. And it is blessing the lives of the people everywhere across this world in spiritual and temporal ways. How grateful I am. I sustain the church. I believe it is true. I know it is true. We are prophet-led. We are spirit-led. And the church has Jesus the Christ as its head. And He will ensure that the church is run according to His dictates and His righteous, benevolent design, according to His marvelous love. He will direct the use of His resources. I certify and testify of that, and hope you have a beautiful day. God bless you.